You wake one morning and the language around you has changed. Not the dictionary definitions, but the social weight of words. What was once a compliment now feels like an accusation you don't understand. What was neutral has become loaded. You ask a question in good faith, and the room goes quiet in a way that suggests you've committed an error you can't see. The rules updated without notification, and everyone else appears to have received the memo. You didn't. The confusion is not about disagreement. You don't even know what you're disagreeing with yet. It's the sensation of standing in a conversation where the subtext has become the text, and you're still reading literally. The first instinct is to assume you missed something factual, a news event, a policy change, a scientific study that reframed everything. You look for the inciting incident. Surely there is a document, a moment, a clear before and after. This search feels rational, but the search itself is the misunderstanding. You are looking for an argument when what exists is a perceptual framework. The people who navigate this fluently did not read a manual. They absorbed a way of seeing. You are trying to find the rule book for something that operates by feel. The frustration mounts because you are competent. You have read. You have thought, and yet you are being told, implicitly or explicitly, that you are not seeing correctly. The instinct is to defend your vision. You were not blind before. Why would you be now? What you are experiencing is not ignorance in the traditional sense. It is a refusal by your psyche to adopt a lens that reorders moral salience without your full consent. The framework asks you to see harm in places you previously saw benign difference. It asks you to treat intent as less important than impact in contexts where you have always trusted intent. It asks you to accept that neutrality is a position of complicity. These are not small requests. They are requests to reorganize your emotional and cognitive priorities. Some people do this easily because the new priority structure resonates with something already alive in them. For you, it does not resonate. It feels like a distortion, so you resist, not because you are cruel, but because you are oriented toward a different form of moral coherence. The explanations you are offered do not help. Someone tells you this is about empathy, but you have empathy. You care about suffering. You simply do not agree that the suffering being described is occurring in the way or to the extent claimed. Someone tells you this is about history, but you know history. You simply do not accept that historical patterns apply to the present case in the manner suggested. Someone tells you this is about listening, but you are listening. You are listening to the words, and they do not make the kind of sense they seem to make to others. The gap is not in your effort. The gap is in the axioms. You are working from different foundational assumptions about what constitutes harm, fairness, agency, and responsibility. No amount of patient re-explanation will close that gap, because the gap is not informational. You begin to notice that the people fluent in this framework treat your questions as symptoms, not as inquiries, but as evidence of where you are developmentally. If you ask why a particular distinction matters, the answer often implies that the question itself reveals your lack of understanding. The framework is self-sealing. Confusion is interpreted as resistance. Resistance is interpreted as investment in the structures being critiqued. You are not allowed to be simply confused. Your confusion is read as motivated. This makes conversation impossible in a very specific way. You cannot express doubt without that doubt being psychologized. And so you stop expressing doubt in those spaces. You withdraw not because you have been persuaded, but because you have learned the cost of remaining unpersuaded in public. The people who move through this easily have a particular cognitive style. They are comfortable with abstraction that does not require empirical grounding before it is granted moral weight. They are comfortable with redefining terms if the redefinition serves a larger ideological goal. They are comfortable with asymmetries in application, with holding different groups to different standards if those standards are justified by historical imbalance. This is not dishonesty. It is a coherent way of thinking, but it is not your way. You need the abstraction to connect to something observable. You need the terms to remain stable long enough to build an argument. You need the standards to apply symmetrically, or you lose faith in the standard. These are not defects. They are orientations. But in the current environment, your orientation is out of favor, and their orientation is treated as the only ethical one. The cost of not understanding is social, but it is not evenly distributed. If you are young, the cost is high. Your career can be shaped by your fluency or lack of it. You learn quickly that certain phrases are passports, and others are marks. You may adopt the phrases without adopting the framework. You may perform fluency to avoid penalty. This is common. The performance becomes habitual, and after some years, you may not remember what you actually think beneath the performance. If you are older, the cost is different. You have already built your position. You are less vulnerable to social censure. But you are also more isolated. The people coming up do not speak your language. You sound to them like someone from another era. You are not wrong in the way they think you are wrong, but you are also not in the conversation anymore. You have been aged out of relevance not by time but by framework shift. What you gain from your position is clarity about coercion. You see very clearly when social pressure is being applied to secure ideological conformity. You see it because you feel it. The people who are fluent do not feel it as coercion because they agree with the goals. To them it feels like progress, like raising standards, like holding people accountable. But you feel the mechanism. You feel the boundary of acceptable thought narrowing. You feel the penalty for dissent increasing. You feel the reflexive expulsion of complication. This sensitivity is not paranoia. It is the advantage of the outsider. You see the shape of the system because you are not inside it taking its assumptions for granted. This does not mean you are right about everything. It means you are right about the presence of pressure, and that is worth knowing. The social consequence is a quiet sorting. You stop bringing up certain topics with certain people, not because you fear conflict, but because you know the conversation will follow a script, and the script is tiresome. They will explain. You will ask for clarification. They will interpret your question as resistance. You will feel misunderstood. They will feel that you are refusing to understand. The friendship does not end. It thins. You begin to seek out the others who also do not understand, not because you all agree on everything, but because you share a grammar. You can say things in shorthand. You can express doubt without it being treated as moral failure. These relationships feel like relief. You did not realize how much energy you were spending on translation until you stopped having to translate. The identity that forms around this is not an identity of opposition, exactly. You are not defined by what you are against. You are defined by what you refuse to pretend. You refuse to pretend that you see what you do not see. You refuse to pretend that arguments you find unconvincing are convincing simply because they are delivered with moral urgency. You refuse to pretend that the framework is neutral when it is clearly partisan. This refusal is not rebellious in the theatrical sense. It is quiet. It is the refusal to lie to yourself in small, continuous ways. Over time, this refusal becomes a part of how you understand yourself. You are someone who does not capitulate to ambient pressure. This is both accurate and self-flattering. It is accurate because you genuinely do not capitulate. It is self-flattering because it frames your position as principled, when it may also be stubborn, incurious, or self-protective. You do not examine this closely because the identity is useful. It organizes your experience. It gives you a place to stand. What happens in the long run is not revolution or vindication. The framework continues. It adapts. Some of its excesses are quietly walked back without acknowledgement. Some of its insights are absorbed into the general culture and stop feeling ideological. You remain outside it, but the outside becomes more populated. You are no longer alone in your confusion. The confusion itself becomes a recognizable position. There are essays about it. There are podcasts. There is a whole ecosystem of people articulating what you felt but could not name. This is validating but also slightly deadening. Your private experience becomes part of a discourse. The discourse has its own cliches. You find yourself irritated by people who agree with you for reasons you do not respect. You realize that being outside the framework does not make you smarter or better. It just makes you outside. And outside is not a destination. It is only a location. You do not resolve this by joining or by fighting. You resolve it by accepting that you live in a time of competing perceptual frameworks, and you are loyal to one that is currently less powerful. This is not tragic. It is simply true. You do not need to convince anyone. You do not need to be convinced. You need to be clear about what you actually think and why you think it. And you need to stop hoping that clarity will be rewarded with understanding. It will not. The people inside the framework will continue to see you as behind. You will continue to see them as captured. Both perceptions are partially true and partially self-serving. What matters is that you stop performing. You stop pretending to understand when you do not. You stop pretending to agree when you do not. You stop softening your position to make it palatable. You speak when speech is useful, and you are silent when silence is wise, and you do not mistake either for virtue. The script of your life does not require you to be correct about this. It requires you to be honest about where you are. You are someone who does not understand woke culture, And you have stopped trying to fix that in yourself, not because you are incurious, but because you have investigated and you have found the framework unpersuasive. This is allowed. It is more than allowed. It is necessary. A culture that cannot accommodate disagreement about its foundational claims is not a culture. It is a regime. You are not a dissident. You are simply someone who did not board the train. The train is moving. You are still at the station. The view from the station is different from the view from the train. Neither view is complete. You have made your peace with incompleteness. That is the resolution. There is no other.